Hi, this is Dale Rhoda, and the topic of this short video will be how to calculate point estimates for our vaccination coverage surveys. We will work up to calculating confidence intervals and bounds in a future video, but first we just want to talk about point estimates. We'll break it into weighted indicators and unweighted indicators. So let's talk first about unweighted indicators. Once we have calculated the derived variable, the indicator variable we spoke of in the recent video, the outcome is coded as either missing or 0 or 1. In order to calculate the unweighted average, we do the following. Add up the number of respondents that have a value of 0 or 1, and this sum is the denominator for our indicator. And now add up the number of respondents that have a value of 1, and this is the numerator. And our coverage estimate is just 100 times the numerator divided by the denominator, and that puts it on the percentage scale. You'll hear us use different terms for the same thing. Sometimes we talk about an unweighted indicator, or an unweighted analysis, or an analysis where everyone has equal weight, or where the respondents are self-weighted. The idea is that every respondent in the survey contributes the same weight to the outcome. As a quick example, we'll think of a data set that has 4 kids. 3 of them were aged 12 to 23 months, and 1 was outside that age range, so the 4th was not eligible really for the analysis. Of the 3 who were eligible, 2 were vaccinated. So the child that wasn't eligible, we're going to code their outcome with a missing value so that they're excluded from the calculation. The child that's unvaccinated, we code with a 0. They were eligible but not vaccinated, and the 2 kids who were vaccinated, we code them with a 1. Well, the unweighted coverage estimate would just be the sum of the count of kids who are eligible in the denominator, that's 3, the count of kids who are vaccinated in the numerator, that's 2, and we multiply 2/3 by 100, that gives us 66.7%. I like the physical metaphor of a seesaw for calculating averages. This is a faithful illustration. This really works. If you put one block at the value 100 for each of the vaccinated kids, and you put one block down here at x equals 0 for the unvaccinated children, well, then the average, the coverage value, will be the point where you would place the fulcrum, and the seesaw would balance and be level, just like this. So we see that if we place the fulcrum at 66.7%, then the seesaw would balance, and that's because we have 2 kids here and 1 kid here, and each child contributes equal weight. Now let's talk about a weighted indicator. There's just a very small difference in how to calculate the weighted indicator. Rather than counting the kids, rather than summing up the number of kids, we're going to sum up the weight for each respondent. So the denominator is the sum of the weights for all the respondents that have values of 0 or 1, and the numerator is the sum of the weights for the respondents with a value of 1. And then coverage is calculated the same way. It's 100 times the numerator over the denominator. If we use the same example, but this time we apply weights, we still have a child that wasn't eligible because they were outside the age range. We have a child whose indicator value is 0, and their weight is 10. That child represents 10 kids in the overall population. And then the 2 vaccinated children, let's say that they get coded with a 1 in the indicator, and let's say that they each have a weight of 20. They each represent 20 kids in the larger population. Well, the denominator is the sum of the weights for all the kids with 0 and 1, so this is 20 plus 20 plus 10, and the numerator is the sum of the weights for the vaccinated kids, or 40. So in this case, the weighted coverage estimate would be 40 over 50 times 100 would give us 80%. We can use the seesaw to illustrate this as well. Now the size of the blocks, we don't have equal sized blocks for each child. With a weighted average, the size of the blocks that we stack up at either 100 or at 0, they are proportional to the weight for each child. So in this case, the vaccinated kids, they had weights that were 2 times the size of the weight of the unvaccinated kid. Now again, if you get out your seesaw and your blocks at home and you put 2 blocks at x is 100, and then you put a block that's half the size down at x equals 0, in order to balance the seesaw, you're going to need to put the fulcrum at 80%. And so this illustration works for weighted estimates as well. As we begin to talk about the specific coverage indicators that WHO recommends, you'll find over time and across different organizations that different people will have different ideas and different guidelines for which ones should be weighted. At this time, the WHO recommendations are pretty straightforward. Any indicator that has all the respondents in the denominator, meaning that every eligible child gets counted in the denominator, then those are weighted. And if the denominator is a subset of children, then those indicators are not weighted. So for instance, dropout is a subset, has a subset in the denominator. We'll talk about that. I think we talked about it in the last video. In the denominator, we only have kids who receive the early dose. If they didn't receive the early dose, they're not in the indicator. And so that's going to be an unweighted indicator. Weighted indicators are estimating population characteristics, and unweighted indicators we use to describe sample characteristics. So we restrict our conclusions to what we saw in the sample, but of course it's very common for people to look at unweighted indicators and to interpret that as being likely indicative of what's true in the broader population. In the EPI program, it's traditional, when we present unweighted indicators, it's traditional to not include a confidence interval. And we continue that tradition with these 2015 and 2017 recommendations. The unweighted indicators, we don't provide a confidence interval. They're reported without sampling variability. I hope this description has been helpful. We'll have an opportunity to look at point estimates for weighted and unweighted indicators in the coming days and weeks. If you have any questions, post your comments in the update where you found the link to this video. Or if you can't find that, then send us an email. Thanks very much.